So a warm welcome to everybody joining us for session 2 of today, our 8th annual ISNTD Bites meeting, where we're looking at vector control and disease surveillance. Delighted to be joined by our panelists this morning. Joining us all the way from Sudan, from the Sudanese National Academy of Sciences in the University of Khartoum, Dr. Ayman Ahmed. He's just put out a paper looking at a new mosquito, the stephensi mosquito that's been looked at in the African region and kind of lessons for vector control policy. We have Dr. Gwenyth joining us from the School of Public Health at the University of Michigan in the States. I believe it's 5:45 a.m. Roughly in the morning. So a double thank you to you, Dr. Lee, for joining us. Dr. Kenny Malpartida-Cardenas from the Digital Diagnostics for Africa Network, based here in Imperial College London. We ourselves are very we're an external partner of the Digital Diagnostics for Africa Network ourselves. With a couple of minutes of delay, so I'll kind of get straight into it, I think, and hand the floor over to Dr. Ahmed. Dr. Ahmed, over to you.
Okay, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation and opportunity to join you in this very interesting event. Particularly that the issue related for the Vectorborne and the control and surveillance of these vectors is rapidly raising up during this COVID-19 pandemic as additional challenge. So here I'm presenting about the threat of the invasive malaria vector, stephensi, in the African region, and what lessons have we learned so far, and what we need to do to adapt and change our vector control and surveillance policy. So the main thing that I'll go through is brief introduction about the emergence of stephensi in the area and the current distribution in Africa, and also what type of threat that this invasive disease vectors bring to the area, and also a brief highlight about the challenge for the surveillance and control in the area. And lastly but not least, what lesson have we learned and what we need to do so far. Stephensi has emerged recently. It's originally from Asia. It's a known vector of malaria in Asia, particularly in Southeast Asia and most part of Arabian Peninsula. However, it has recently emerged in Africa, where it has been reported for the first time in Djibouti in 2012, and later have also emerged in Ethiopia in 2016. In 2019, it had been reported for the first time from Sudan and Somalia. And what we can see from that is how rapidly it's progressing and spreading. This is what so far have been reported. However, the most important thing about this report, all of them has been found or detected accidentally. Like, unfortunately, our routine vector surveillance is not in Africa. Mainly, it's not that proactive and paying attention for the invasive species. So the detection and reporting of an stephensi from all those area in Africa so far has been like sort of serendipity of research discovery. In the Djibouti has been detected when there was upsurge in malaria cases, and was when this upsurge have been investigated, they found that stephensi has been the major player in that malaria epidemic. Same goes for Ethiopia, and when it comes to Sudan, it has been also reported during just investigating of insecticide resistance among the major vector of malaria in Sudan, Anopheles arabensis, and at that times during that investigation and study, Anopheles stephensi was accidentally discovered. This represents a huge and a very alarming situation in Africa, that it tells us that our current vector surveillance isn't capable of collecting and identifying all the different vectors or potential vector of disease, including malaria, and that mainly due to the motto of doing business as usual. So by our vector control and surveillance teams, they keep focusing on the already known members of malaria vectors, mainly Anopheles gambia, complex, and Anopheles phonesis groups. And one of the differences between the Anopheles stephensi and the well-known local vector in Africa, that both Anopheles gambia, complex, and Anopheles phonesis group, they are breeding on ground. On the other hand, Anopheles stephensi mainly breed in man-made water containers. That's why it is out of the reach of our like routine surveillance for malaria vector. And this urged the need or raised the call for integrated vector surveillance and management, and instead of focusing on like one habitat or breeding site or of similar nature, it should focus on integrating all possible breeding site into the routine surveillance and paying attention for the different. And this is one of the huge challenge that unofficials are bringing in Africa, because it challenged our practice, our local knowledge, expertise, and the routine work during the surveillance. So the WHO soon has realized this challenge and the threat that unofficials bring in the area. So they have launched like a global alert about unofficial stephensi, emergency and invasion to the Horn of Africa. That was in 2019, and also on the same time they have incorporated like totally new section in their malaria threat maps about the invasive vector species, which is so far dedicated for monitoring and time reporting of anopheles stephensi globally. And if we went into that section, that the red dot, it tells us that where anopheles stephensi have been reported as invasive, while the green dot is that's the area where anopheles stephensi have been detected, but as a native or a local species. So, however, if we pay attention, like for those red dots, particularly the one that in the western part of Sudan, like to the far left of the screen, it shows that now Anopheles stephensi is rapidly spreading into Africa, and now it's almost in border with of Sudanese border with Chad, Libya, and Central Africa. This will make the challenge and the issue of Anopheles stephensi beyond the Horn of Africa, and it might progress and spread into Central and West Africa. Actually, we talk here hypothetically that it didn't do that so far, but it might have been already spread into that area. But as I mentioned, due to the limitation in the surveillance system and therefore unactive surveillance targeting Anopheles stephensi is very, very recommended. And I was involved in this recent update for the distribution of Anopheles stephensi in Sudan. And that was mainly discovered through an active surveillance targeting and looking at searching for Anopheles stephensi in the potential breeding site, not the usual one. And we aim to understand and the full distribution or the spread of this vector in the country. And however, when we reviewed previous sample that we have collected in 2016 and 2017, we have realized that, and we did like molecular analysis, and because the sample were preserved, some of them preserved in RNA later, so they were not available for morphological identification. However, when we use sequencing tool and molecular to revisit and reconfirm the species of those samples, it turned out that there is some sample collected in 2016 in Sudan, and unfortunately were belonging to Anopheles stephensi species. That tell us our newly produced knowledge about Anopheles stephensi is kind of naturally outdated, because up to now no one knows when, how exactly Anopheles stephensi have invaded any region in Africa, not only in Sudan, but for how long it has been there, how it got there, and so and the current and up-to-date distribution. No one has accurate information about that, and this is one of the issues that we need as a global vector control surveillance and control community. We need to work on that and put our best investment. So the threat of Anopheles stephensi, in addition to like having an additional vector of malaria in the region, in additional to the currently known vector, as I mentioned before, Anopheles for instance and Anopheles gambia, Anopheles stephensi bring additional threats to the area. One of those threats is that it's an efficient vector, for both Plasmodium falciparum and Plasmodium vivax, and this has been confirmed naturally and experimentally in the lab. And this might play a major role in changing malaria epidemiology in aspect of ratio between the prevalence of stephensi, between malaria vivax and the falciparum malaria. And as we know, each of these species infection has a different case control protocol, and therefore any increase in malaria vivax in the area, it might require changing the case management or the program protocol for the case management. Another threat that Anopheles stephensi bring in the area, it is mainly urban and mostly breed in man-made water containers, and this has advantage and disadvantage. One of the major disadvantages that malaria issue so far in Africa was mainly associated with the rural area, and heavy transmission in this rural area, and even the control program is built around delivering better control and better surveillance in the rural area. So now this is one of the factors that made Anopheles stephensi out of the reach of the routine surveillance, because it's mainly thrive and breed and expand in the urban area. And another disadvantage related to this will change malaria transmission from seasonal malaria, that's the heavy transmission mainly occur during the rainy season, where there is expansion on ground breeding sites that are available for mosquito, and now with this breeding behavior of Anopheles stephensi in man-made water container. And as we know that most of Africa had issues with rapid urbanization, and with this rapid urbanization and lack of stable water supply, people in most of the community tend to store water in man-made water container, which is the perfect habitat for Anopheles stephensi to breed. And therefore we might have, and like a few recent studies have alarmed about this and warned from having malaria epidemic in large city in Africa due to the availability of man-made water containers throughout the year. So we'll have like throughout the year transmission season with high potential for malaria epidemic. However, the one advantage that we see so far with this man-made with this breeding in man-made water container is that the surveillance and control of Anopheles stephensi could be integrated with surveillance and control for Aedes aegypti, because they are co-breed and coexist in man-made water containers, and this has been confirmed in most of area where have anopheles similar have been reported so far in Africa, including Djibouti, Ethiopia, and also in Sudan. The third threat that anopheles are bringing to the area is the limited knowledge and data we have about the bionomics of anopheles in Africa. And as I mentioned before, that the surveillance and control teams of the vector in Africa, they are more knowledgeable, skillful, and oriented toward the locally known species, Anopheles gambia and Anopheles for instance. So there is a huge gap in knowledge about the bionomic of Anopheles I, while including when it treats like when it take blood meal, the host preference for the blood meal, and the resting behavior, the breathing behavior, and the biting behavior. All of these important information is still we lack, and we need to work on generating such valuable data. So our intervention would be evidence based and guided by the behavior of nervous side in Africa, because changing the environment and ecology from Asia to Africa, that might have been associated also with changing behavior and bionomics. Also, we lack valuable information about the susceptibility of anopheles stimuli in Africa for the currently available vector control tool, including insecticide-based and larval management intervention of tool. So, challenge for having a totally invasive or a new vector in the area, that's challenge the surveillance system in many ways. And for anopheles stimuli in Africa, this challenge could be summarized as follows. But firstly, it's the knowledge and skills and experience and practices in the vector surveillance system in Africa is oriented to the locally known species, for instance, and Gambia group. The suggested improvement here is to upgrading the integrated vector surveillance and ensuring that surveillance system in Africa are really integrated instead of species oriented or one disease oriented. It should shift to like integrated vector surveillance system. And also another challenge is the lack of using advanced tool for confirming the species, because morphologically it's sometimes the vectors look similar, although there is differences. And recent key have been published, identification key have been published last year by Maureen Cozy, that including anopheles stephensi. Nevertheless, handling thousands of samples per day for the vector surveillance teams sometimes lead for people to just sort sample instead of doing proper identification. Therefore, the morphological identification for this vector need to be supported by advanced molecular and sequencing tools. This might help in providing and generating timely data about the species, and could be used for monitoring the spread of anopheles stephensi and other infectious disease vectors. Another challenge is that how, because it's mainly breed, anopheles stephensi mainly breed in man-made water container, which mean mostly in houses. Therefore, the surveillance for anopheles stephensi need to include house and container inspections, which is very laborious, labor demanding, and costly. However, to tackle this issue, we need to build the capacity of vector surveillance and control teams by increasing the number of trained people, and resource mobilizations, and also community engagement might offer a great help here. And all of that depend on the resources. And as we know, in most of Africa, there is a huge shortage in the resources, local resources mainly. Therefore, we suggest that engaging the global community because the spread of analysis stephensi, it's risking all the progress have been made so far in the prevention and control and elimination of malaria in Africa. Therefore, uh, global engagement is crucial to maintain that success and take it further by succeeding in preventing any further spread of this invasive disease vector as well. So building partnership and collaboration with local and international organizations, including academic institute, private sectors, and as well as um, non uh, non-governmental organizations. Um, However, this experience of the emergence of another systems in Africa and the challenge we have been through and the persistent one that have give us good lesson to learn from and what we need to build on that and go further. Uh, Mainly, this includes that policymakers should invest more in the vector surveillance and control systems by upgrading the capacity, including increase the number of trained people in these teams, the equipment, infrastructure, and also resource mobilization for the running cost of the surveillance. Also, vector surveillance teams in Africa need to shift from doing business as usual because that's how we missed detecting a reporting of suicide timely as early as it could be possible. Therefore, it needs to be more vigilant for the invasive species and paying attention to monitor their spread and distribution. Not only for our system side, but also for else adults, which is uh, very alarming for our arboviral disease transmission in the area. Also, the use of molecular and genomic tools for the confirming of the species of vector, because as we mentioned, although it is easily distinguishable using morphological key, but sometimes the sample conditions due to the limitation in the collection tool and lack of expertise of the collecting teams or lack of training in morphological identification that might yield in misidentification of the disease vectors. Therefore, using a backup of molecular and genomic tools, it will be very, very helpful. And also, disease vector surveillance, it needs to be proactive. It needs to be responsive to any increase in cases. For instance, this has helped in the detection of the presence of another stephensi in Djibouti because what have prompted them to do extensive vector surveillance and do entomological study is the increase in malaria cases, and that was an unusual increase. They had that in mind, so one of the aspects they have investigated is vector composition, and that how they discovered the presence of another system inside. Therefore, we need to have in our mind, and the vector surveillance need to work hand by hand with the disease surveillance system, or it could be integrated all together. Last but not least, molecular surveillance systems, molecular genome surveillance systems might offer a very cost-effective and more proactive strategy. However, it requires resource mobilization, but it would be very helpful not only for the anaphylaxis stephensi or malaria, but for particularly for arboviral disease. So by detecting, confirming the species and detecting the pathogens they carry, that will generate super valuable information and timely. Here's some references, and thank you so much.
Thank you so very, very much, Ayman, for that wonderful presentation. I think you made some absolutely vital points in terms of what actually is needed. And this is why I wanted to link this entire surveillance thing to policy, because we can talk about the tech all day long, but unless we can link it to change at policy level, nothing's going to change. And I think you've illustrated that in the paper that you put out, how important it is, this new kind of this stephensi kind of threat. Urban areas, I'm sure there are more than just the water container sites, cryptic breeding site, building sites, all sorts of areas where this thing's going to start establishing. So I think it's absolutely vital illustration of why we need better, more proactive, as you've said in your presentation, surveillance systems in place. So I'd like to say thank you very, very much for that. And wonderful, some great feedback from the audience as well in the chat. And just on the audience, I'd like to give a shout out just for the next speaker. Quite a varied audience actually from across the world. Dr. Bior Garang, greeting from the Leprosy and NTD Organization of South Sudan, Landos, Sudan. Hello there, Bior Garang. Dr. Monal Daptadar from the veterinarian and public health professional from the National Center for Disease Control in India, who has joined us. So hi, Monal, thanks for joining us for that. We have Ronald Morales Vargas, and I think Ronald's joining us all the way from, Vargas is joining us all the way from Ahmed University in Thailand. And so hi there, Ronald. We have Leo Brack joining us, some very famous names in entomology, I think, coming on. Or from Mexico, Daniel Velaquez joining us there. From India, Dr. Arti Rama joining us. Elinigaya Kureka saying, nice presentation. Mohammed Rizwan from Pakistan is saying, echoing the points that houses and container inspection does not produce required results. They've got a lot of experience in dengue in that area of the world, so I'm sure that's been going on there. So that, Dr. Arti Rama nicely presented, such a nice and informative topic, so that's great. Some great claps, and thank you to the audience for those feedbacks as well. I think that moves us very nicely into the next speaker. You would have heard Dr. Ayman Ahmed talk about some of the policy recommendations, upgrading to integrated vector surveillance. Better technologies are needed potentially. Remember, we are in a COVID setting at the moment. That headwind is there, the backdrop is there. And I'm just wondering, what type of technologies that could get into that kind of a scene. And for that reason, we're delighted to welcome to the floor Dr. Gwenyth Lee from the School of Public Health at the University of Michigan to talk about unmanned aerial vehicle mapping in terms of dengue outbreaks in rural communities. The setting there is Northern Coastal Ecuador. Gwenyth, thank you so much for joining us. I feel so bad because it's so early in the morning in the States, but thank you very, very much for joining us. I think I'll hand the floor over to you. So round of applause and over to you. All right.
All right. No, thank you so much for having me. Everyone can hear me okay?
Perfectly. Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, thank you again for inviting me. It's very interesting to hear about all of this amazing work that's going on, and to try to think about how maybe some of what we've done recently can be integrated a bit further with surveillance systems. So my work is fairly, I would say we're kind of in early phases of this research. We've just conducted a few pilot studies and are thinking about how to go ahead. So this is still fairly early days for us, but I'm hoping that I can maybe learn something from this audience that has more experience in this area. So I thought I would just say something briefly about the recent work we've conducted and mention a bit about some follow-up studies that are now going on. So this is the study that was recently published, and I'll spend most of my time on this and then a little bit of time on next steps. So to give a bit of background, I work in Northern Coastal Ecuador in the province of Esmeraldas, and we work in a number of different communities in the canton of El Faro. So we have currently conducting dengue surveillance studies in 6 communities, including some which are kind of moderately urban, such as the town of Borbon, some which are rural communities but accessible by road, and so somewhat intermediate. And then we have also some communities that are only accessible by river. And previously in this region, we didn't see as much dengue transmission in these rural communities. We did see malaria into the early 2000s, and then there was a bit of a switch over where we began to see much less malaria and much more dengue throughout the region. We also work somewhat in the city of Esmeraldas, but I don't have that shown here because it's not part of this particular study. So this particular study was just done in one very, very small community, the community of Santa Maria. This is a community of around 150 households and 576 residents. It is about 2 to 3 hours boat ride from the nearest urban center, so it's quite remote. There are some other towns of similar size nearby, but that's about it. And as far as we know, and based on information shared with us from colleagues at the Ministry of Health, there's no known history of dengue in this community. Doesn't mean that it wasn't there, but until recently it hadn't been observed. We hadn't observed substantial dengue transmission here. And this map, what I aim to show here is just sort of an interesting feature of the community. So unlike in most of the region where we work, communities tend to be entirely Afro-Ecuadorian, or they might be entirely indigenous Chachi. But it's very rare to see communities like this one that are actually a mixture of both ethnic groups together. So in this case, what happened is that there were previously 2 communities, an Afro community and a Chachi community that were quite close together, and they eventually just kind of integrated to become one town of Santa Maria. But this is, as I mentioned, this isn't very common, so it kind of makes the community a bit unique. And this is just what the community looks like. I'm sure people have seen so many kind of pictures like this in other places, but the only thing I'll point out about these particular photos is that these are Chachi households. And the reason I know they're Chachi households is because of the way they're constructed. So that the Chachi households, that they tend to like to build their houses on stilts like this. That's because, as you might have noticed here, the Chachi houses, this medium gray color, they often are living right along the river. And so because they're living close to the river, there's quite a lot of flooding. And so to avoid flooding in the households, they often build wooden houses on stilts. The Afro community, they kind of prefer to live a little bit further away from the river on higher ground. And so you see much more households built of cement and without stilts. So the houses up here, kind of in the very top of this photo, those are likely to be Afro houses. And so you can see, even just walking around, that there are these pretty clear differences. You know which ethnic group, which neighborhood you're in based on just how the houses are constructed. So in this particular case, the study that we conducted describes this dengue outbreak, which occurred in 2019. We have very good information about the outbreak because we working very closely with the Ministry of Health, and it's a small community, so they were able to provide a lot of detail about what might have been going on. So initially, we were pretty confident that dengue was probably introduced into the community in February. There were 2 students from the city of Esmeraldas who were visiting the community, visiting their family during the school holidays, and they were both diagnosed with dengue. And so we think this is when the introduction occurred. Then in a few weeks later, in March, we saw a few cases, not in the town itself, but one was in a nearby town and one was in another visiting student. And then at that point in basically the very end of May, this is when the outbreak actually occurred. So although we think that there was probably circulation going on for all these first couple weeks, it wasn't really picked up until late May. And at this point, we had a lot of cases. And the Ministry of Health responded very aggressively. As soon as there were a large number of cases identified, they sprayed every household, and so they fumigated very aggressively, and they also provided abate and did abatezación to like every household in the community area. So they were pretty engaged directly, but unfortunately this wasn't enough to stop the outbreak, and we can say more about probably why that happened. And by the end of 2019, there had been about 10% of the community had a symptomatic infection. So this was just kind of a chance thing for us. My research team that I work with, we're engaged in this very large scale sort of 6-community study of dengue transmission. And just by chance, just before the outbreak began, we had decided that we would like to include this community in our study. So just before the outbreak, we happened to go and do a lot of work to characterize the community, and the timing just happened to be like that, which was fortunate. So here we have our study team visiting the community, and they were basically just kind of looking to sort of understand what the landscape was. So in the end, we used a couple of different data streams to characterize the outbreak. The Ministry of Health provided us with data about cases that they identified, their fumigation campaigns, the INSPI, which is the National Public Health Research Institute in Ecuador. They conducted entomological surveys, and the study team led by the Universidad San Francisco de Quito, they conducted active surveillance, laboratory work to determine to confirm dengue, and then we also did this drone mapping, which I'll talk about the most. So the primary results that we found were that there was this outbreak, around 10% of the community was affected, but the majority of these cases actually were observed in Afro-Ecuadorians, even though the Afro population of Santa Maria is smaller than the Chachi population. There are more Chachi households than Afro households. And this was really the only very significant risk factor we saw for case status. There was a little bit of an association with age, but not much else. And so it was clear that the Afro population probably had a different risk. And so the intention then of the drone mapping was to try to understand something about why that was the case. This just shows the same information, but now with the incidence of cases in the community colored in. So you can see that these yellow communities where there were very few cases, these were all Chachi neighborhoods. And these darker orange and red communities, these are all the Afro neighborhoods. So clearly there's some difference there. And this red circle is the location where entomological surveys were identifying 80s that were ultimately shown to be positive for dengue 1. So we know that there were dengue mosquitoes in this neighborhood, but they weren't found in other parts of the community. And I have circled here the football field because we think for various reasons that this may have been a key site for the epidemic, for the outbreak. So we used the drone mapping. This was a pilot activity. We had not done drone mapping before, so this is really just reflecting on our experiences with trying that out and seeing how it went. We used the drones, first of all, for container identification. So you can see here, this is what the image of the community looked like from a distance, from sort of the far out version. And then you can actually zoom in on this image pretty highly until you see something like figure 4C here, where you can see a couple of covered larger water barrels that are under the eaves. And so we use the drone image to map every visible container, water container in the community. We also use the drone image to calculate a vegetation index. In this case, we use GRVI, but there are others as well. And so this gives a sense of how much greenery is in the community. And so we also measured that. And then looking at those two features, we tried to characterize something of the difference between Afro households and Chachi households, features of the environment that might have been driving the difference in disease risk. So one of the things we saw was that, so Chachi households are substantially larger, usually more members than Afro households. They tend to have sometimes several people siblings living together, and so you can sometimes find households of 20, even 20 or 25 people, and so but in this case it wasn't that but so there's slightly larger households and much denser, just the population density is higher in general. They tend to have less vegetation surrounding their houses. Maybe that's because there's more people, and they also were storing less water. This is maybe partially because they do live closer to the river, so they are a little more likely to use river water, whereas the Afros kind of were more likely to prefer rainwater. And they also are a little bit more yeah, but anyway, so those were the sort of the primary differences. There was less water storage in the Chachi community, there was less vegetation, higher population density. And in the entomological surveys, we saw many more positive containers were identified in the Afro side of the community compared to the Chachi side as well. So that gives us some insight as to what was going on, that probably the built environment of the community was a little bit different between the two neighborhoods, with the Afro side being more a better habitat for Aedes, and as a result of that there was probably more likely to be sustained, that the transmission was being sustained in that side of the neighborhood, and possibly seeding infections into the Chachi side, but potentially with less sustained transmission on that other side of the community. And so this is all just kind of a single experience that we had learning about this technology and trying to think about how to use it. So it's obviously just very preliminary, but I'll provide a few of our insights and conclusions to date. So one thing that we did find with the drone mapping was that it was very useful qualitatively to understand the landscape. That's something we didn't expect initially. I think we were more focused on vegetation indices and trying to identify containers and things like that. But we did find, looking back on the outbreak, that the map was very useful to understand what was going on and to identify features that we hadn't initially hadn't initially paid too much attention to. So in this case, the football field was not something that we had initially considered. We hadn't spent a lot of attention, time mapping the football field, or really even kind of noting it in our surveys, but it did seem like that was the center of the outbreak. And when we talked to community members, and that was also clear that there were some households that were traveling during 2019, and they were they had kind of locked up their houses, so they couldn't easily be accessed by fumigators, but they were generating a lot of mosquitoes. And so we think that the drone was just useful for that. You could kind of look at it and understand very well in the community how things were located, even if you didn't have direct knowledge yourself. We also felt that it was helpful in the sense that, compared to some of the other methods like remote sensing, which are available, so it's very easy to do the drone mapping. We were able to, so we trained members of our study team to use the drone to collect the maps, but you could, in other studies, our collaborators have trained other just members of the community. So really it's pretty easy to pick up, and that's a nice feature. And once you have someone who knows how to do it, you can do it with whatever frequency you feel you like. So as opposed to having to be reliant on images collected maybe once a year or once every 5 years, whatever, you can just do it as often as is convenient to you, and that's a really nice feature. It's also, I think, there's a low, it's not challenging just to get started and try it out. It's fairly easy to pick up, or was easy for us to pick up as a study team. The major challenges were administrative, because the use of drones is fairly new, both in research. I think people are kind of becoming more comfortable with it for recreation, like for children and that kind of thing, but it's not very well defined. How to use them in public health research or surveillance is still not very well defined. The part of Ecuador we work in is right on the border with Colombia, and there's a lot of narco trafficking, and sometimes drones are used by narco traffickers. Sometimes they're also used by the government in trying to track narco trafficking activity. So administratively, we spent a lot of time reviewing the laws around drone use, both in the United States and Ecuador. In order to get approval to do the work, we had to work very closely with the authorities and make sure that all the police were informed well in advance, that community leaders were informed well in advance. It was a little bit challenging administratively because the universities weren't used to this kind of research either, so they also didn't really know exactly how to regulate it. And so I think this is something that going forward will be important to clarify, because obviously the researchers, we want to obey all of the laws and the guidelines, but if it's not even clear exactly what those guidelines are, it can be a little bit complicated. So at this point, we're kind of involved in a few next activities, which I won't spend too much time on, except to say that we have now done mapping of a few other communities paired with entomology, and so we're hoping to directly link drone identified features with entomological features going forward. And I think that I will just end there, except maybe also to add that our team has been also very involved, not in this study, but in others, in trying to integrate this kind of mapping into what we call like citizen science. So training community members on how to fly the drones and provide them with drones directly, and then using that information that they're collecting themselves to inform the government of any kinds of issues that they might be able to identify through that mapping. And so we're hoping that we can think about how to do that as well. So it's not just us coming in and doing the mapping and then leaving, but that we're kind of working with the community to do it going forward. So yeah, thank you very much for your attention.
Dr. Lee, thank you very, very much for an amazing presentation, actually. I'm getting a lot of feedback from the audience on that. So many bits and pieces to unpack there. There's a question. There's a Dr. Fiona Allen. Great to see you, Fiona, by the way, on the chat. Actually, Fiona's from the Natural History Museum and also the St Andrews University up in Scotland. She's asking, excellent presentations. How was the acceptance of using drone mapping within the community and with the authorities? I think you kind of answered that a little bit in terms of that. I'm only asking that now because I've been told we have to, this session will have to end at 12 because we've got the built environment session that has to start directly at 12 because of some scheduling clash with the speakers. Why I'm asking this is, would you be okay with if Fiona would be able to contact you directly and ask that question? You'll be okay with that by email?
Yes, absolutely.
That's brilliant. I think that's a superb presentation, and that really an alternative to consider when looking to upgrade integrated vector surveillance country level perhaps as well. Dennis Masui, excellent presentation. A lot of claps coming in for you for that. So thank you very much for that. I suppose that takes us on to the next and final speaker for the session. We'd heard kind of earlier on in the first session that there is an absolute need to start thinking now about diagnostics and bringing diagnostics into these kind of situations for VBD control, vector-borne disease control. And we are external partners of the digital, one of many external partners of the digital Diagnostics for Africa network based in Imperial College, London here. And great pleasure to introduce the next speaker to the floor, Dr. Kenny Malpartida-Cardenas, looking at molecular diagnostics. Dr. Ayman Ahmed had mentioned the need for better, more proactive molecular diagnostics. And the Digital Diagnostics for Africa Network, if you don't know what they're doing, you have to have a look at what these guys are doing, not just in VBDs, but across the board. And so I think that's a bit of an introduction there, but I think over to you, Kenny, in terms of molecular diagnostics for infectious diseases using microchip technology. A round of applause for Dr. Malpartida-Cardenas. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. I'm very glad to be presenting today about our work on molecular diagnostics for infectious diseases using microchip technology as part of the Data Diagnostics for Africa Network and Imperial College London. So, vector-borne diseases are one of the leading causes of morbidity and mortality, and one of the best examples are malaria or dengue. In addition to vector control strategies, they have been discussed by previous speakers, and these diseases have highlighted the crucial role of diagnostics for control, identification, and to reduce their spread. In particular, molecular diagnostics could be defined as the application of molecular biology techniques to detect infections at genomic or proteomic level, and one of the best well-known examples is PCR. The conventional workflow and the one that we are using in our group rely on the first extraction of nucleic acids through a sample preparation from blood or swab samples, for example. Secondly, nucleic acid amplification by PCR or LAMP, different molecular methods. And thirdly, the detection of the result of the amplification, which could be optical, such as fluorescent-based or colorimetric, or as in our case, electrochemical, using microchip technology. So the nucleic acid amplification method that we employ is called LAMP, loop-mediated isothermal amplification, which, in contrast to the well-known PCR, it is performed at a constant temperature of around 60 to 65 degrees. Results could be obtained in less than 30 minutes, and it's highly specific and sensitive. In more detail, LAMP is commonly done with 4 to 6 primers, and amplification occurs at this temperature thanks to the strand displacement ability of the BST polymerase. All these advantages make LAMP very suitable for point-of-care applications due to the fact that thermal sampling is not required, and this reduces the complexity of the hardware that is needed. On the other hand, microchip based on CMOS complementary metal oxide semiconductor is a technology that you can find in your cell phone, and it offers several opportunities if used for diagnostic purposes, such as scalability, low-cost production, miniaturization, and integration of circuit design. So what we try to do and what we are doing is combining LAMP with CMOS technology in order to develop a lab-on-chip device for the amplification and detection of target pathogens of interest, such as the one causing malaria, in the palm of your hand. So in our group, we have developed a lab-on-chip device that is called Livestream, and this system is composed of a platform unit, which includes a temperature controller. It's all based on electronics and it's portable. A disposable cartridge with microchip sensors and a microfluid chamber where the reaction can be loaded. And also the platform is connected via Bluetooth to an Android application to visualize the results in real time and geolocalize where the test is being performed. This will allow for surveillance and infection control. And in addition, data can be recorded, leading to the first generation of data diagnostics aimed at the point of care. So the microchip that allows the detection is based on ion-sensitive field effect transistors or ISFETs. And these sensors are fabricated in a modified CMOS technology, and they have the ability to measure pH. So the way it works is that when nucleic acid amplification occurs, protons are being released, and this changes the pH of the solution, and this is what is measured with our ISFET sensors. The result is a sigmoidal signal similar to the one obtained with fluorescent-based instruments when the target is detected. So combining LAMP and lab-on-chip technology aims to meet the reassured criteria from the WHO. So as we can see here, it is a molecular method, nucleic acid detection and portability, and then also microfluidics, cloud connectivity, surveillance. This cannot be achieved with this platform. So I would like to present a study case, which is the application for diagnostics of human malaria. So as previously also mentioned today, malaria is one of the most threatening infectious diseases. It is a mosquito-borne disease caused by Plasmodium pathogens, and there are several human infective Plasmodium species. The most dangerous and commonly found is Plasmodium falciparum. Nevertheless, it's also important to diagnose non-falciparum malaria, which is currently misdiagnosed because of the lack of tests, and therefore cases are underestimated. So we have been working on the development of a panel of assays to detect all human infected Plasmodium species with a turnaround time of less than 20 minutes and high sensitivity and specificity. So as an example, we firstly developed a Plasmodium falciparum assay and demonstrated its translation to the lab-on-chip device, showing the suitability of this platform compared to conventional fluorescent-based real-time instruments. And we demonstrated that quantification is possible, which is a huge milestone that was achieved, and the detection also of clinical isolates, which was extracted DNA from parasites. Another rising challenge with malaria is the emergence of artemisinin resistance, which is the frontline treatment for this infection. This means that infected people are not responding to the administered drug, and the origin of this resistance is associated to the presence of some mutations in the genes of the parasite. So, to be more clear around this, if the parasite contains the mutation A, for example, in that particular gene, it will be resistant to the administered treatment, and the infected patient may not recover. So, based on LAMP, we developed a method for detection of mutations, which can discriminate samples containing one base pair change. So this method has been applied for detection of drug-resistant parasites causing malaria, Plasmodium falciparum in particular, and is to SNP single nucleotide polymorphisms. So there is two reactions: one targeting the wild-type allele, which will detect the presence of the parasite that will be responding to the drug. Another reaction will be targeting the mutant allele, detecting the presence of a parasite that will be resistant to the treatment. So we demonstrated as well the translation and similar results obtained with our lab-on-chip platform compared to a conventional fluorescent-based instrument. So translation into the point of care for surveillance could be achieved with the Livestream platform due to the incorporation of cloud connectivity and geotagging. This handheld portable platform is easily adaptable to emerging pathogens, as it will only change the assay that is being developed targeting the DNA or RNA of the pathogen. So here it is shown several cartridges, the platform, and a mobile phone with a dedicated app. And next, I'm going to play 2 short videos. So this is from 2019 when we brought Livestream to Ghana to validate its performance for detection of malaria. And detection and quantification was performed within 20 minutes. And here you can see us testing several devices and also the real-time detection in the mobile phone application. So to conclude, we are working towards the integration of a sample-to-answer diagnostic device. And for that purpose, we are developing as well rapid low-cost extraction methods and the incorporation of lyophilized reagents to avoid cold chain. So to summarize, diagnostics are key to effective management of infectious diseases and vector-borne diseases. And molecular methods are promising tools. Lab-on-chip technology in combination with LAMP will fulfill the reassure criteria, and they are the future of data diagnostics for surveillance and infection control. They can also be repurposed for targeting the vector itself, as previously also mentioned. And lastly, we are part of the Digital Diagnostics for Africa network, aiming at the development of data diagnostics, and the network comprises researchers from different parts of the world and disciplines. So I would like to acknowledge all of them, and in particular also our research team at Imperial College, at the Center for Inspired Technology, the Faculty of Medicine, and Life Sciences, and all the collaborators that made this possible. So thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Kenny. The amazing presentation as always. We have a presentation from you earlier in the year on our YouTube channel, our website, which you're all welcome to look at, as well as the series that we've built with the and are continuing to build with the Digital Diagnostics for Africa network. Just wanted to say thank you very much to Gwenyth for answering Fiona's Dr. Allen's question there. That's very much appreciated, your comprehensive answer there. Your presentation, Dr. Kenny, has thrown up a lot of questions in terms of interest. Dr. Al-Haji Amadou Nyang is asking about, is it possible to use this device to detect Plasmodium parasites within the vector? He's asking, can this device be used to detect parasites within the vector? Any steady cage is collaboration possible? Test has not been yet done. I know Aubrey Cunnington, the director for the Digital Diagnostics for Africa network, is on the chat box as well. I'm just going to ask you guys, is it okay, because we're in a little bit of a time constraint, would it be okay if people contact you guys directly through email? Is that okay with you?
Yeah.
That's very much appreciated. Thank you for that. Thanks for that. There's other questions as well, actually. So I suppose it's all so Sonalika Mahajan, are such chips available for customized detection of other viruses? And there we go. Dr. Aubrey Cunnington has actually just put out the how to contact the Digital Diagnostics for Africa. So that's great. A lot of questions coming through there. I thought it was a wonderful session, and I wish we had another hour or two to get into the actual questions. Perhaps we can look at that for our weekly broadcast moving forward, to kind of build on some of these technologies and how they fit into integrated vector surveillance strategies at national level. I'm sure there's a lot of bandwidth there to discuss, and we can kind of look at that moving forward. But I just wanted to say to all the panelists, a huge thank you for that. It's kind of really started stimulating a bit of debate. Dr. Fiona Allen, many thanks for your answer. I really enjoyed your presentation. So I think you're making some friends here. Dr. Mohammed Rizwan, could we use tests to detect dengue virus in Aedes? All of these things are coming through, and I'm sure you'll be able to contact each other and discuss all of that. I mean, I thought that was fantastic, and I wish we had longer. You mentioned the built environment, and we heard it earlier as well. We are going to be putting in, the next session is literally looking at that, and it starts at 12. I suppose one of the big things we haven't kind of brought into this are the costings of all of these technologies. People say high-end technology, you mentioned marketing, all the costing comes into the mind. How much is it going to cost? Is it going to be viable in elmic settings? I suppose all those questions will be directed to you, Dr. Kenny, in terms of the audience and moving forward, and to the other panelists as well. I'd just like to say thank you very, very much for a wonderful panel. A special thanks to Dr. Ayman Ahmed for joining us from Sudan. We realize it's a really kind of not strange time, but it's a difficult time for you to join, and we spoke with you yesterday about this as well, and we doubly appreciate that. So thank you very much for that. Thank you very much, Dr. Gwenyth Lee, as well, and Dr. Kenny, thank you very much. I'm going to give you all a round of applause, and I'm going to have to ask everybody to jump to the next room on that link that Marianne sent through for the next session, which is going to be looking at urbanization, the built environment and vector control with the United Nations Habitat, World Health Organization, the BOVA network, and also Professor Olaf Forstek as well. So thanks a lot, and we'll see you in the next room. Okay, thanks a lot, everybody. We'll see you in the next room. Thanks.